And he said, well, why don't you record some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your family? And I decided to give that a shot. And it soon became clear that people who are not my cousins were watching and using it. And they started sending me letters and comments saying, this is the reason I was able to pass algebra. This is the reason why I didn't drop out of high school.
Boa tarde. Neste painel, nós teremos palestrante internacional. Por isso, vamos conduzi-lo em inglês com legendas em português. We are proud to receive our keynote speaker, the man who promoted a revolution in online education, the one and only Mr. Salman Khan from Khan Academy. Welcome to the Fórum da Liberdade, Sal.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Khan Academy started in a fairly surprising way. Back in 2004, I was an analyst at a financial firm. I was a year out of business school. It came out of conversation right after my wedding that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble with mathematics. And so I offered to tutor her, remote tutor her. She was in New Orleans, I was in Boston, and she agreed. And so I started working with her, and slowly but surely, I was able to help fill in the gaps that she had. It was around unit conversion. And then I remember she got caught up with her class. She got a little ahead of her class. And then I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rehman should be able to retake the placement exam from last year that was putting her into a slower math class. And they said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they surprisingly let Nadia take it. And that same Nadia that in August of 2004, who was having trouble with unit conversion, having trouble with 7th grade math, with a little bit of help, a little bit of tutoring, and a little bit of self-confidence, was then able to become an advanced student and one of really the top students in her school. So I was hooked. It was a great way for me to connect with family. It was a way for me to connect with content that I really enjoyed. So I started working with Nadia's younger brothers. Word spread in my family. Free tutoring was going on. So before I knew it, I was working with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends. And I saw a pattern that I had seen with Nadia. And frankly, I had seen even with myself, or I had seen with friends and family while I was going through school, which was the reason why people were having trouble. It wasn't because they weren't bright. It wasn't because they didn't have good teachers. It wasn't because the subject matter was difficult. It was because they had gaps in their knowledge. They might have said, let's say when they were learning decimals in 5th grade, they might have gotten an 80%. And even though the test has identified a 20% gap, the class will then move on to the next subject. So they never really mastered decimals. And then when they get to the 6th grade, maybe they got a 70% or even a 90% when they learn negative numbers, but that there's still a gap. So they never fully mastered it. And so then all of a sudden you get to an algebra class or a physics class, and it involves a decimal or it involves a negative number. And that's actually the gap. And it's very hard in a traditional academic environment to address that. Now, middle class or especially affluent families have always had a solution, which is called tutoring. A tutor will sit down with you and will figure out what those gaps are and fill them in. And that's essentially what I was doing with Nadia. But with a background in software, I said, well, maybe I could write some tools for my cousins so I could make this gap filling of their knowledge more efficient. And that was actually the first Khan Academy. It was a little software project for my family back in 2005, where I could give them exercises that they could progress at their own time and pace. I, as their tutor, the teacher, could understand what they were working on. And it was working. And, it was only 10 or 15 people who were using it, but I was finding a lot of joy out of this family project. And then in 2006, I was showing off this software that I was writing at a dinner party. As you can imagine, I'm a super fun dinner party guest. And the host said, well, this is cool, Sal, but how are you scaling your actual lessons? And I told him, his name is Zuli. I said, Zuli, you're right. It's hard to do with 15 cousins what I was doing with just Nadia. And he said, well, why don't you record some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your family? And my initial reaction is that is a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano, not for serious learning. But I went home that weekend, got over the idea that it was not my idea, and I decided to give that a shot. And I started just making videos on what I found I was explaining a lot to my cousins, and I asked them for requests so that I could make things for them. And after a month, they famously said that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And what I believe they were saying is it was very useful to have an on-demand version of their tutor or of their cousin that they could pause and repeat and not feel judgment. If they were in 9th grade but had to review something from 5th grade, they didn't have to feel embarrassed because no one would ever know. So I took that as positive feedback. I kept going, and it soon became clear that people who are not my cousins were watching and using it. And they started sending me letters and comments saying, this is the reason I was able to pass algebra. This is the reason why I didn't drop out of high school. This entire time I had a day job. I was an analyst at an investment firm. And that started in 2000. And by 2009, I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. And I sat down with my wife. We had some money saved up, essentially for a down payment on a house. Our first child had just been born, but I was like, the social return of this project, we could one day reach tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of people, maybe in all of the languages of the world. And I took the plunge, and I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit. I don't own Khan Academy. It's a public charity. And I said, surely someone in the philanthropic community will recognize the value here and hopefully support it. And I think anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, whether it's for-profit or not-profit, you have to start with that delusional optimism, and then you quickly discover that maybe the universe doesn't recognize the brilliance as much as you do. And so it was a hard year, but by the end of that year, people started to take notice. Some prominent people in Silicon Valley started saying, hey, this is interesting. Google reached out and said, hey, we're interested in projects that have the chance of teaching the world. Famously, Bill Gates just randomly, I had no idea, started telling people that he's been using Khan Academy. It's been really helpful with his kids. He's been learning from it. And so you can imagine between Google and Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation, that validation, and then they both went on to become funders of Khan Academy, helped us become a real organization. Now you fast forward that 2010 was when we got that first significant funding, all the way till about to 2020, so that decade, Khan Academy grew faster than I could have ever expected. When I used to operate actually in the same walk-in closet back in 2009, 2010, I used to dream about maybe one day 10 million people will use Khan Academy. Well, now we have 120 million registered users, 20 or 30 million come every month, and it continues to grow. We have 50 localization projects around the world. Brazilian Portuguese is one of our top ones. And once again, speaking of incredible philanthropists who have really stepped up, it was in the early days of Khan Academy, the Jorge Paulo Lemann and the Lemann Foundation came out of the woodwork. They visited me in my very humble offices out here and said, we need to bring this to Brazil. And that was actually one of the very first projects to do Khan Academy outside of English in a very, very serious way. And as hard as the pandemic has been, and it has been a net negative in education this past year, to be clear, it has stimulated a lot of really important conversations. People are more energized about closing the digital divide, making sure people have internet access and devices at home than they ever have before. That's a positive. More people than ever are talking actually about education and what is the best way to educate than ever before. You have a generation of teachers, parents, students who've been thrown into the deep end of the pool on technology, which has been hard, and they've done heroic work, but then this is going to make it easier for them to innovate going forward. It's made everyone ask questions about, well, is the best classroom one where the teacher just lectures, or is the best classroom where the students are constantly active, constantly doing things, and it's facilitated by the teacher, and the teacher is able to focus on some students while some other students are able to work independently and then switch off to those students. So broadly speaking, I think it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of positive change. When I think about where all of this is going, and the pandemic has, I think, catalyzed this or accelerated this by 5 or 10 years, I think we are moving to a world where ideally you have a physical classroom, but using tools like Khan Academy, using tools like schoolhouse.world, we can help raise the ceiling and the floor, make sure your gaps are filled in, make sure you have personalization. And if you go to a school that might not have classes that you connect with, that might not offer classes at a world-class level, Khan Academy, the schoolhouse.worlds of the world can provide that. But then on the other hand, if you are in a part of the world where you don't have access to school, that Khan Academy can help raise the floor for you and give you access to a pathway so that you can really really reach your potential.
I would like to start our Q&A here with a question from me. I was in my master's. I was beginning my master's in 2011. I'm an economist, and I was beginning a master's in economics, and I was learning about ordinary differential equations. And for me, it was kind of difficult because I did not have a background in engineering or mathematics, and Khan Academy helped me a lot to overcome my own gaps. I think one of the successes of your software and your approach is that it is student-centered. You always provoke in the videos the student with a problem, an idea that he may be interested in solving, either from probabilities, either from the political system in the U.S., as you once did, and this looks like a winning approach. What do you think are the new tools you are seeing in the digital world that can help this experience become much more profound, centering the student, helping him understand his gaps, and intelligently knowing, okay, I have a gap here, I have to fill it somehow, I need this type of tutoring for doing it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And the one thing, as someone with a technology background, I think it is always tempting. I personally find it always tempting to look at the fanciest technology and want to play with it and want to build something with it. And you almost have a solution in search of a problem. And, it's funny, with that same mindset, when my friend suggested to make videos, I thought videos were such a low-tech thing. Even in 2005, 2006, videos existed in some way for 100 years. What's the big deal there? So my tech side of me said, oh, there's nothing here. But the realization in hindsight was the tech is not what matters. What matters is what you're able to create or build using the tech, using the technology. And to your point, I think a lot of folks, even with videos, they immediately want to do fancy graphics. They immediately want to make it, do all this fancy things. But if you can, using traditional means, connect with the learner, put them at ease, be a little bit fun, show you a real personality, prompt them through the video to get excited about something, to be actively learning a part of the process, it can go a long way. And so even video, I think we're still at the early stages of really tapping in and using it well.
Great. There's something very, it's not unique, but it's quite smart and intelligent from Khan Academy. All videos are short. You don't have long videos to tutor people instead of the way classes, usual physical classes are. And we have a question from the public here. They say this model is very different from standard school class model. And do you think less time is more important because it's more efficient in teaching? It's better to make people really understand a small concept, then going to the next one, instead of piling up a bunch of concepts and going on in a traditional class?
Yeah, and first of all, I can't take too much credit for it. I remember the very first video I did in 2006, it got rejected by YouTube because it was 12 minutes long. And so YouTube forced me on, I had a traditional view that a lot of people had back then, that how am I going to explain this thing in only 10 minutes? But then you realize anything can be broken up into 10-minute sections. And in fact, within a longer narrative, a complete thought is seldom more than 10 minutes. In fact, you usually can do a complete idea in 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. And so that was a great forcing function to be sub 10 minutes. And in fact, since then, we've probably started to even get closer to around 5 or 6 minutes of video. You can cover the same content, but cover it in more bite-sized portions makes a lot of sense, because the human mind, and we've all experienced this when we sit in a classroom or when we sit in a long meeting, there's good research that shows the human, you can pay attention to something, especially something that's pretty deep, for about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes if you're really focused. Then you're inevitably your mind's going to wander. And it's on average going to wander for 5 or 6 minutes, and then you're going to remind yourself, oh wait, I wasn't paying attention. And then you'll try to re-engage, and now your attention span's even shorter. And now instead of 15 minutes, you might only be able to pay attention 9 minutes. And then you're going to wander longer. And the real question is, why have we had 60-minute classrooms for so long, given this human phenomenon that's existed for hundreds of thousands of years? And the answer is probably logistics. When you're in an in-person classroom, it takes energy to move people from one classroom to the next, take out your textbooks, et cetera, et cetera. So once it starts going, you want to keep it going. Now, even with that said, as we talked about earlier, if you just lecture for 60 minutes, I don't think that's the best practice even in a physical classroom. But then the other notion is, when you think about it as a human being, when you just sit and listen to a 60-minute lecture, you're very passive. You're like, okay, lecture, tell me, and you try to pay attention, you try to take notes. When it's an on-demand video that is 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes long, you're deciding to say, hey, that might have something that's interesting for me. So your mind is already activated. You're almost asking a question. And so when you click on it, and then if that video says, hey, why don't you try to solve the problem before we do it together? Then you're like, okay, let me try to do the problem. And then with the video, the parts that you're bored, you can scrub it so that you can move ahead. You can watch it on double speed. If there's something that happened that you didn't quite get, you can repeat it. If you still don't understand it, you can do a web search to understand that word, come back. So it provides a lot more flexibility, and it makes the learning process much more engaging. And in a lot of ways, now that when I'm in a physical classroom or I'm giving a talk, I try to replicate those same things where I'll stop after 5 minutes and I'll say, what do you think? How would you do it? Why don't you work together on this instead of me telling you what to do? But I think that's really helped in terms of people feeling connected and engaged in the content.
So thank you very much. That was great conversation. We're happy to have you here, and we hope you can come back next year.
Thanks for having me.
All the best.